Fish and chips in the rain, I'm home again.
Enoch was the best parliamentarian I ever knew. Everything in Enoch's speeches had to be worked out in reason from first principles.
Claimed he was a man of unwavering principle.
For reasons which they could not comprehend, the indigenous population found themselves made strangers in their own country, their wives unable to obtain hospital beds in childbirth, their children unable to obtain school places, their homes and neighbourhoods changed beyond recognition.
The message is clear. Mr. Everyman looks in the mirror and sees a beast who must be restrained. He must have a word with himself to remind himself not to attack women. After that, he has to speak to his friends to make sure they don't forget not to launch violent assaults on women either. This is an appalling thing to hint at, because it would never ever cross the mind of the average man to do such a thing.
Well, I can already hear the chorus of execration. How dare I say such a horrible thing?
Pamela Powell remains her husband's most loyal supporter. She says she's come to expect having their lives turned upside down every few years, for Powell has spent a lifetime provoking controversy.
How dare I stir up trouble and inflame feelings by repeating such a conversation? My answer is that I do not have the right not to do so.
A white guy starts pestering a woman who's waiting for a taxi. His conduct is awful, and he becomes increasingly insistent and aggressive towards her. But guess who is the only man in the group to have the courage to speak out and tell him to stop behaving in such a terrible and sexist way? It is, of course, the black man.
In 15 or 20 years' time, the black man will have the whip hand over the white man.
Oh my dude. Look at the body on that.
It's rude to ignore people, you know.
That's not okay.
What?
Enough.
It's not funny.
We can call out our mates for harassing women.
Powell became the target for demonstrators after his rivers of blood speech in Birmingham. But attitudes towards him traversed normal party lines.
You are aware, are you not, that I'm opening a garden party?
Yes.
On the Saturday afternoon. Hat, dress. There's a ladies' luncheon. There's a YC wine and cheese. There's a tea club. There's a wine and beer. One hat for the wine, one for the beer. And there's a ward supper. Now, will you kindly tell me how many hats and how many suitcases that represents? Because that's what's got to go into the car.
Then too, there is the accompanying idea that black people are naturally more warm-hearted and empathetic than white people, who are often cold and cruel. It would make perfect sense from this perspective for a wicked white man to be hassling some random woman in the street, and for a kind and sensitive man of African origin to set him straight. Then again, we have to remember there's a convention these days on British television that black men must not be shown as villains, but rather only as intelligent professionals and people with good characters.
While the health minister was happy to pose with his daughter Jennifer in nurse's uniform, he preferred to cooperate with the media.
Gentlemen, Powell, sorry to trouble you. Could you just confirm that you are standing?
I can't do anything at all. Can't do anything.
There is a report, sir, that you are standing.
I can't do anything at all.
No
sorry, it's so disappointing.
All right, Mr. Powell, many thanks.
Now, have you got all you want, gentlemen?
Always obliging.
At your disposal if you want to photograph me.
Yes, indeed.
Here I am.
Always courteous to the press and to television. The heart of courtesy. But my waistcoat is a little rumpled, isn't it? I'm rather creased. Perhaps I've slept in it.
won the leadership.
The greatest compliment that a hamster can pay to a human being is to demonstrate how relaxed they are and comfortable, and they will wash their little faces. And one of these dinner parties, people were in the garden, and Ted Heath was one of the guests there. And he did not like having a hamster running all over him, I don't think. But the hamster liked him, and the hamster sat on his lap and washed his little face. And Ted Heath was the only guest that had been paid that particular compliment by the hamster. We subsequently realised it was a momentary lapse of judgment by the hamster, but we didn't hold it against him.
If Powell could do little about his politically incorrect hamster, he was determined to inculcate his daughters with his own reverence for Britain's past. Before their regular family picnics, known as Powell picnics, he would take them on lecture tours of medieval churches.
It's 12th century up to the short of a top story, and this perpendicular window is late 14th, early 15th century. Been put in, there was probably a narrow light originally there.
It wasn't all tours round old churches. Enoch Powell would regularly provide a bizarre form of entertainment for his daughters.
He doesn't really like going into the water or swimming or anything else like that, and he, above all, hates his hair being washed.
There are two strands to this business worth noting. The first is that it is another manifestation of the idea that all bad things, whether colonialism, slavery, or the sexual harassment of women, are devised by white men.
A new Prime Minister was actually putting Powell's economic theories into practice. Mrs. Thatcher was said to carry in her handbag extracts from his speeches. But Powell could summon up little public enthusiasm for the Thatcher brand of monetarism. Did you approve of what she was doing economically?
It was in concord with my ideas.
You seem to be sort of rather grudging about what Mrs. Thatcher did as Prime Minister economically.
I was never quite sure that she understood the doctrine. She was applying it, but did she understand it? That was the question.
Would you say economically that you are a Powellite?
I would say economically we both hold the same views, and I originally got them from Enoch, but also, of course, Keith Joseph took them up, and we developed them very much in the Centre of Policy Studies, and they are now the orthodox views. And I hope that I was just a little bit of a help in putting them into practice and seeing what they could do for the British people.
Enoch Powell celebrated his 83rd birthday at a friend's house earlier this year with his family and his grandchildren.
I have yellow ones. You're going to learn your letters now. Well, that's an O. O. When your mouth is round, then you say O.
I can't say O. I can't say that.
Oh, you don't really.
The Powells have now been married for over 40 years.
That's an A. A for apple. Go and tell Grandpa that.
The poems he once used to write to an imaginary woman are now written to Pamela Powell.
A good beginning.
Alpha.
Alpha. I do write poetry for my wife, but I only write it once a year on our anniversary. I started at our first anniversary by presenting her with 1 rose and 1 poem. At the second with 2 roses and 2 poems.
We never could at first have thought what all the years between have brought, nor seen ourselves with blushing posies composed of 37 roses, and goodness knows what still remains of such uncovenanted gains. No cause then to begrudge the years where always something new appears, or with the passing time deplore the pleasures that we had before. The only thing that does get worse, it seems, is quality of verse. Nice little twist, isn't it, at the end of that?
I say jocularly it is her pension. I say you can publish these when I am dead. I don't know whether this is advice that she will follow. I shall not be there to see. Or to receive the royalties.
The marketplace romantic has carefully planned the arrangements for his own funeral. After a service in the chapel of his regiment, he'll be buried in full-dress brigadier's uniform.
Look at those flags, Enoch. Aren't they marvellous? Really wonderful.
Powell's British nationalism has led him to attach himself to many a lost cause and to utter many a prophecy of doom. But he says he has no regrets, least of all for being the one senior politician prepared to play the racial card. He once famously remarked that all political careers end in failure.
I end in political failure, yes.
One final point deserves consideration and might already have occurred to some viewers. The idea that white men are more likely to abuse women than black men, which is a message pervaded not only by these films, which are typical of a number that I've seen, is by no means borne out by the figures. Up-to-date statistics on ethnicity as regards sexual assaults and rape is not always easy to come by. In 2016, 57% of men living in London were white. However, just 43% of suspects in rape cases were white, meaning that white men were considerably underrepresented in this crime. At the same time, just 16% of males in London were black, and yet 35% of rape suspects were black. In other words, black men seem to account for twice as many rape suspects as their numbers in the population would suggest. They were greatly overrepresented. I draw no general conclusions about this, but it is certainly worth thinking about when you watch those films in which the white men are shown as mad aggressors towards women, and the black men are portrayed as gentle, reasonable, and ready to prevent any untoward behaviour towards women.
It is like watching a nation busily engaged in heaping up its own funeral pyre.
Welcome to England.
Fish and chips in the way, but am I the same?
ठीक हो गया जी, चैनल ਨੂੰ ਸਬਸਕ੍ਰਾਈਬ ਕਰਕੇ ਤੇ ਘੰਟੀ ਦਾ ਬਟਨ ਨੂੰ ਟੈਨ ਕਰਕੇ ਦਬਾ ਕੇ